seeing how elections officials inside the system could try and bring it down from within, causing the chaos they falsely accused others of creating. We asked the governor straight up what it would take for there to be a mask mandate in Colorado schools. Fresh census numbers show a changing state, though perhaps not as quickly as some thought. The collapse of US 36 was a long time in the making. And let's quit blaming bark beetles for our dying forests. It's not that simple. The world isn't simple, but you can handle that. That's why you're watching next. Colorado Republicans tried and failed to find evidence of election rigging here. Now, 2 investigations are looking into whether Republicans themselves improperly or illegally got inside the voting system. Conspiracy theorists are hailing Mesa County's Republican clerk Tina Peters as a hero for the public release of voting system data from her county. Well, now Mesa County has to pay for new secured voting equipment or count their votes by hand. Here's Marshall Zellinger.
To be very clear, Mesa County clerk and recorder allowed a security breach and by all evidence at this point assisted it.
Colorado's Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold believes Republican Mesa County clerk and recorder Tina Peters is partially responsible for voting system passwords ending up online as part of a conspiracy theory to prove election fraud in Colorado.
The voting equipment currently in Mesa County can no longer be used.
The state cannot verify who had access to 41 pieces of voting equipment in Mesa County after they were updated and certified on May 25th. Griswold said video surveillance watching the machines had been turned off 1 week prior and stayed off until recently, and that the county let a mystery man attend the upgrade while passing him off as an employee. This demo video from the Secretary of State's website shows the types of machines now deemed no good in Mesa County: touchscreen voting devices, ballot scanners, and election workstations and servers.
To be very clear, these machines will have to be replaced, or Mesa County will have to do a hand count.
It was a solo, intentional, and selfish act.
Matt Crane is the head of the Colorado County Clerks Association. The former Republican Arapahoe County clerk stopped short of saying Peters, an elected leader, should resign.
We've heard people say that this is a heroic act. To be clear, there is nothing heroic or honorable about what happened in Mesa County. If you want to know who the true heroes are in Colorado elections, it's the other 63 county clerk and recorders and their teams.
So if we only know about the Mesa County breach because it was blogged about, how does the state know the machines in the other 63 counties are good to go?
We have no reason to believe at all that this is a widespread issue. There is multiple reasons as to that, some of which I cannot comment on because of the criminal investigation.
It reminds me of the devil's advocate: trust but verify. The Secretary of State pointed out multiple times no one person has the keys to the castle, that there are dual passwords and other measures to maintain security. But again, we only know about this because it showed up on a website, which was the point of my question. 63 other counties haven't shared information, if they did anything, to be posted somewhere. So, have we checked?
So you will hear a lot of Republicans these days try to distance themselves and their party from the whole bonkers stuff about China rigged the election, Antifa rigged the election. Not a lot of them speaking out against what happened in Mesa County, though.
I know that today some were waiting to see what she was going to say at what we were calling the Pillow Conference. Matt Crane is the only one so far who is a Republican that was very explicit in saying this is not good, but didn't say she should resign because it's still premature, he said. But yes, the silence from everywhere, you would think that no matter what, you could say, we shouldn't be doing it this way, and people would stand up and say otherwise. I don't know why not.
Yeah, no response today from the state Republican Party, the county Republican Party, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who represents that area, although the Republican county commissioners did say they're going to talk to their lawyers tomorrow. Thank you, Marshall. Mask mandates for kids returning to school in Colorado. It's a hodgepodge of different rules in different districts because there's no statewide standard. So instead, the state's offering schools as an option of free, voluntary, rapid testing for students. We asked Democratic Governor Jared Polis today if there is anything about the pandemic that would cause him to issue a statewide mask order for schools.
Certainly hospitalizations is the metric across the board. We will not overwhelm our hospitals. We will take the steps necessary to avoid doing that. The other metric for schools is in-person education. If we see that districts are failing to be able to stay in person simply because kids aren't wearing masks, we will absolutely look at taking action. It is more important that schools are in person and the kids are able to benefit from that learning environment in a safe way.
As you'll notice, the governor didn't really commit to any kind of a statewide order even at that point. It sounded like more he was calling for action at the individual school district level. Chris Vanderveen, has led our COVID coverage throughout the pandemic and watched the governor's actions carefully. Chris says if parents are hoping that the governor's going to swoop in with some executive power on masks, be ready to be disappointed.
So what's it all mean? If you're looking for the governor to come in and issue a statewide mask mandate in schools, particularly in schools that have no such mandate, stop. He's not going to do that. He's telling the districts they remain in charge here, which puts a ton of emphasis on local school boards and superintendents. He's also saying the priority will be to keep schools open to in-person learning. The state's going to try to do that with expanded student access to testing. That's tricky too, because no one under the age of 12 is vaccinated. We're talking students generally 6th grade and lower. Should one in that age range test positive, normal CDC quarantine guidelines will apply, which gets real messy, real fast.
Whether or not Colorado ends up with a COVID surge like we saw last fall is going to depend on human behavior, on people's choices. And that's often the hardest factor to predict. Our Nusha Roy talked with the people who are paid to make those predictions for Colorado.
Today's conversation centered around how to avoid a surge like last fall, and it's coming up because it's within the realm of possibility.
There are scenarios where we could see another peak in hospitalizations akin to what we had in December.
There are two main factors to watch here: vaccine uptake and how many people follow COVID precautions like masking and social distancing.
Then we can avoid, one of these peaks that I think none of us wants to see happen again.
So what would that take? The Colorado School of Public Health ran a model a few weeks ago.
If we can get to 80% of adults vaccinated and 70% of eligible teens vaccinated, we could ensure ourselves a much safer fall and a much more normal fall.
Since that modeling, vaccination rates plateaued or increased in some age groups, and the CDC issued mask guidance, but it would still require jumping from around 52% of 12 to 17-year-olds to 70% with at least one shot, and 73% of those 18 and older to 80% by Labor Day, 3 weeks from now.
You would need a real substantial push.
You think like you have nothing left, and then you just do it. And I feel like our healthcare workers are doing just that.
This time around, UC Health isn't just planning for COVID, but how to keep up with other care.
We can have COVID, which is potentially going to surge. And then on top of that, we're going to have potentially flu and other respiratory viruses as well. And so in our thinking, we're not just thinking COVID, we got to think sort of broadly.
And if Colorado stays on its current trajectory,
it might mean, disruption to education, disruption to workplaces.
So both experts say that increasing the vaccine uptake, it's possible, right? This time we've got the infrastructure and we can have the vaccine supply as well to give it out to thousands of people at a time. The question is, will people actually do this? And when I asked the School of Public Health if Delta has made modeling really difficult for them, Kyle, they said what's more difficult than modeling the virus is just modeling out what human behavior is going to be.
As it has been from the start of the pandemic. Anusha, thank you. So there are 14 American cities that grew by more than 100,000 people in the last decade. You probably guessed that Denver's one of them. Colorado's population grew by at least 10% from 2010 to 2020. The largest population growth, you could have guessed this too, happened along the Front Range, Denver metro area, and in northern Colorado. The area seeing the most people leaving, the Eastern Plains. Colorado did become slightly more diverse over the last decade. The state is still 65% white. Next largest demographic is Hispanic or Latino Coloradans, who make up 22% of the population. Those census numbers will help redraw Colorado's congressional districts and add an 8th one. The Redistricting Commission saw today's numbers when the rest of us did. They had been working off of estimated numbers that did not please Latino leaders in Colorado. Mike Cortez with the Colorado Latino Leadership and Advocacy Research Organization, better known as CLARO, says that the lines were drawn as if Latinos across the state have the same needs.
You can't just move the boundaries around until the numbers of Latinos seem to be right. You have to take account of the fact that folks in San Luis Valley don't have that much. Yeah, they have some things in common, but they also have their own concerns. compared to, say, the folks up in northern Weld County.
An example on the state legislative side. Our data analysis shows 15 state house districts that are 30% or more Latino. The initial redistricting maps would reduce that number to 12 districts with that kind of Latino representation. Colorado drew its own suggested maps that had 16 house districts that would be 30% or more Latino. We finally know what likely caused US 36 to collapse 2 years ago, and the groundwork for that was laid, or at least began to erode, years prior. Speaking of the ground shifting, can an area hit by wildfires, then swept away in a mudslide, also be susceptible to avalanches?
Burn scars and avalanches, again, are kind of complicated.
This is complicated, and it's important. Next. The Aurora Police Department is doing a house cleaning that would make Marie Kondo proud. There is another officer out, fired for failing to stop a colleague from beating a man they were arresting. Officer Francine Martinez was fired today for failing to intervene in that, as well as unsatisfactory performance. She and Officer John Haubert responded to a trespassing call July 23rd. Haubert was caught on body camera strangling and pistol whipping a man named Kyle Vincent. Haubert's facing felony assault charges. He's since resigned from APD. The collapse of US 36 at Church Ranch in 2019 was 6 years coming. You do not need to take my word for it. I am not a bridgeologist. That is according to the engineering firm that traced the cause of that collapse back to the floods of September 2013. No one was hurt when that portion of US 36 in Westminster just collapsed. CDOT was eventually able to get 2 lanes open in each direction as they rebuilt the highway using a specialized foam. An engineering consultant firm investigated what caused the collapse, and their report blames 2013 flooding for causing erosion. They also pointed to inadequate drainage and a failure to adjust plans once a wall was heightened to accommodate a bike path. That messed with the stability. The project cost $17.5 million to rebuild. All 3 design and engineering companies involved are paying CDOT a total of $14 million, part of a deal that requires CDOT to say publicly that everything's hunky-dory. Hey, speaking of CDOT and what it tells and doesn't tell the public, CDOT did not want people driving Independence Pass as an alternate route when I-70 was closed. And the locals up there, they don't want the traffic either. But the fact is the pass can be safely driven by cars and people who know what they're doing. When CDOT erroneously told the public last week that Independence Pass was closed due to a mudslide, there was no mudslide. CDOT's internal emails from that time showed that CDOT really just wanted it closed due to heavy traffic. CDOT later came out and said there wasn't really a mudslide.
It's all about perspective, right? Slightly better air quality for us today. I mean, this shot in Fort Collins, we can actually see the outline of the foothills. Not bad. And then this shot, I know still there's a lot of haze out there, but a bit of blue way up high. A lot of that smoke still impacting the Pacific Northwest. We will be monitoring improving conditions as tomorrow arrives. We'll be tapping back into the monsoon, and that will bring us a better chance for some scattered showers and thunderstorms by tomorrow afternoon. They roll into the metro area about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and then scoot off to the northeast where they might turn severe. Daytime highs tomorrow back into the 80s, so a bit of a break from the 90s, but you know the drill. They're back before you know it. We're hot early next week with a better chance of storms by next Wednesday.
You can't blame the bark beetles for everything. New research says Colorado's dying forests aren't just the work of those insects. Those high country mudslides sure do look like they create the perfect avalanche chutes. Definitely not what we need hanging over I-70 all winter. Smart question from a viewer and an answer next. Blaming bark beetles for the bulk of Colorado's dead trees, that take is so 2009. New research from CU Boulder says that heat and drought are doing 3 times as much damage. It's damage being done to our forests very, very slowly.
Climate change is having an effect on all of our subalpine forests. I'm Robbie Andrus. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Washington State University. This research is part of my postdoctoral position at the University of Colorado. This research was started by Dr. Tom Veblen. He started monitoring trees at Niwot Ridge in 1982, and every 3 years or so, graduate students and undergrads and other folks have gone up and monitored individual trees. They have little dog tags on them, and they've tracked those individual trees. There's about 5,000 of them. This research was interested in looking at whether rates of tree mortality are increasing in subalpine forests. These are the high elevation forests in Colorado where people like to go skiing. These rates of mortality seem very low, but again, remember that subalpine forests cover a very large area. So, very small increases can have an important effect across a large landscape like that. The larger and the older trees are dying more rapidly than the smaller and younger trees. And this is important because the larger trees are the ones that store the most carbon. Warmer and drier conditions during the summer are resulting in higher rates of tree mortality. We need to know that, climate change is happening an important effect, here in our backyard.
Appreciation to the folks from CU for sharing their insights with our photojournalist Byron Reed. Now, bark beetles are not totally off the hook. Researchers say the warmer, drier weather can also lead to more beetle outbreaks. Tonight's next question comes to us from Craig in Thornton.
Hey, next. Thinking of all the mudslides that we're constantly having in the I-70 corridor this summer, are we going to be at an elevated risk for avalanches in that same area this winter?
That is a great question, Craig. We took it right to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center and its director, Ethan Green.
Mudslides, debris flows, and avalanches tend to happen in the same types of places. Burn scars, if they're removing all the vegetation, can make things worse for avalanches. But typically, it's not quite that simple. And so we really have to look at slopes on a case-by-case basis. You could have the perfect terrain feature for an avalanche, but if it's in a place where you don't get a lot of snow, then avalanches aren't going to be a big issue. Because of just where we are in Colorado and where Glenwood Canyon is, we do get snow in that area. And so avalanches are a problem sometimes, but it's not like other parts of the mountains where we have snow all the time, thick snowpacks, heavy snowpacks, year after year, day after day throughout the winter. The snowpack there tends to be fairly shallow.
So that's good news. Burn scars and mudslides don't tend to make an area any more prone to avalanche. That's going to depend on the snow that falls there. But they could make avalanche areas worse. If you have a question you want to answer, just slide into our DMs. Record a video or audio message of yourself asking the question. Email next@9news.com. You know the deal. If you're thinking about something, a whole lot of other people watching are thinking of the same thing too, and we'll discover the answers together. A newspaper's correction and apology is the most Pueblo thing we saw today. Plus your feedback next. The most Colorado thing we saw today is a local newspaper apologizing for a food faux pas. Pueblo chieftain issued an apology and explanation today for a National Wire story they published earlier this week that praised New Mexico hatch chilies, the culinary arch enemy of the local Pueblo chili. The top story on the chieftain's website today insisted that the ode to the hated hatch chilies was not chosen by their local editorial staff. They said the article was, quote, not meant to cause harm or to infer that the hatch chili was superior. News from Pueblo. Perennial Republican congressional candidate Casper Stockham writes in tonight, critical of our coverage of the Mesa County voting system breach and the clerk's conspiracy theories. Casper writes, it's really cute that Antifa Kyle's giving us a play-by-play. Curious, though, if what they're sharing is fake, why bother? That is a great question, Casper. Covering these election rigging lies is important so that we can verify the security of our voting system. And there's always the possibility that some people might be misled into believing the lies and would attempt a violent insurrection again.